The photo trembles in Marla Jennings' weathered hands. She traces the outline of their smiles with her fingertip. Her and Robert, standing proudly in front of the colonial-style home they'd saved for 30 years to buy. The morning light seeps through dusty blinds, illuminating half-packed boxes scattered around what was once their living room. Tomorrow, at 68 years old, Marla will have nowhere to call home. It wasn't just the house Marla was losing. It was the life she'd spent decades building. One memory, one sacrifice, one moment of trust at a time. 42 years, she whispers to no one. 42 years in this house. She places the photo carefully into a cardboard box labeled Memories in shaky handwriting. The foreclosure notice sits on the coffee table, its cold, legal language a stark contrast to the warmth this home once held. 6 months after Robert's sudden heart attack, Marla discovered the devastating truth. The home she thought was paid for had been secretly mortgaged without her knowledge or consent. "How could you do this to us, Bobby?" The question hangs in the air, unanswered, as it has been since she first discovered the papers hidden in his desk drawer. 4 years earlier, their retirement had seemed perfect. Robert had worked 40 years at the manufacturing plant, climbing from the factory floor to middle management. Marla had been a school secretary, stretching every dollar of their modest income. They'd raised 2 children in this house, hosted countless Christmases and Thanksgivings. The mortgage had been paid off during their 55th birthday celebrations, a dual milestone they'd popped champagne for. "To freedom," Robert had toasted that night. "No more payments, no more debt. Just you and me and our golden years." Marla remembers how proud she'd felt. The daughter of parents who'd lost everything in the recession of the early 1980s. She'd grown up with a deep fear of financial insecurity. Robert had always promised her they'd never face that fate. And for decades, he'd kept that promise. Their retirement party had been modest, but joyful. Colleagues bringing casseroles, their children presenting them with a weekend getaway to the beach. Everything had seemed so secure. The first sign something was wrong appeared about 2 years after retirement. Robert began checking the mail before Marla could see it. Small shifts in behavior, turning over papers when she entered his home office, changing the subject whenever she brought up their retirement accounts. "Is everything okay with our finances?" she'd asked one morning over breakfast. "Everything's fine," he'd said, not meeting her eyes. "Why do you always worry so much?" She trusted him completely. Robert had always handled their money, investments, taxes, insurance. Marla had focused on the day-to-day budgeting, stretching their income with coupons and careful spending. It was how they'd always operated, a division of responsibility that had worked for over 4 decades of marriage. "I just wonder if we should look at our accounts together," she suggested gently. "Maybe go over everything once a year?" "You never understood this stuff," he said with an edge of irritation. "I've got it all under control. Don't you trust me after all these years?" And she did trust him, completely. So she'd backed off, ignoring the knot of worry that occasionally tightened in her stomach. The day everything changed started normally enough. It had been 6 months since Robert's funeral. The grief was still raw, but Marla had begun the painful process of sorting through his belongings. Their children had offered to help, but this felt like something she needed to do alone. One final act of intimacy with the man she'd loved for nearly 50 years. His desk drawer stuck slightly as she pulled it open. Inside, the usual clutter, pens, paper clips, a small calculator. But beneath a stack of old birthday cards, she found a folder she didn't recognize. Inside were documents with the words, "Reverse Mortgage Agreement," printed across the top. At first, Marla didn't understand what she was reading. Numbers, legal terminology, Robert's signature on page after page. But one thing became frighteningly clear. Their house, the home she thought was fully paid for, had been mortgaged again 3 years into their retirement. With trembling hands, she called their bank. The customer service representative spoke with rehearsed sympathy as she explained that yes, Mr. Jennings had taken out a reverse mortgage on their property. No, Mrs. Jennings's name wasn't on the documents. Yes, with Mr. Jennings deceased, the loan was now due in full. But that's impossible, Marla had said, her voice barely a whisper. I never signed anything. How could he do this without me knowing? The truth emerged in painful increments over the following weeks. Robert had forged her signature on the spousal acknowledgement form, a crime, her children's hastily hired lawyer explained, but one that would be difficult to prove now that he was gone. The reverse mortgage had allowed him to withdraw equity from their home in a lump sum payment of $285,000. The money was gone, all of it. Bank statements revealed Robert's secret: years of online gambling losses, investments in a friend's failed business venture, and cash withdrawals that Marla couldn't account for. The man she thought she knew better than anyone had led a double life of financial deceit. We can fight this, her son Michael insisted during a tense family meeting. There must be some protection for spouses. But the financial counselor at the senior center shook her head. Linda Friedman had seen cases like this before. Perhaps not with the forged signatures, but the end result was painfully common. With a reverse mortgage, when the borrower dies, the loan becomes due, Linda explained gently. Usually, that means selling the home to repay the loan. There are some protections for surviving spouses, but since your name isn't on the loan documents at all. But I'm his wife. I've lived here for 40 years, Marla protested. I know, and it's utterly unfair, Linda acknowledged. But legally, the lender can demand repayment now. And with the loan amount plus accumulated interest, it's more than the house is worth in today's market. Marla's daughter Emily squeezed her hand. You can come live with us, Mom. We have the room. But the thought of leaving her home, of being dependent on her children, filled Marla with a sense of failure so profound it took her breath away. This house was supposed to be her security, her legacy to her children. Now it would be sold at a loss, with nothing left over. The bureaucratic nightmare that followed seemed designed to compound her grief. Letters from the lender arrived weekly, each more threatening than the last. Calls from sympathetic but ultimately unhelpful housing counselors. Forms to fill out requesting delays, hardship exceptions, anything to buy time. Sometimes the cruelest wounds are delivered in plain envelopes, with cold legal language that reduces a lifetime of memories to mere collateral. I don't understand all these terms, Marla confessed to Linda during another meeting. Maturity event, HUD regulations, non-recourse loan. It's like they're speaking another language. That's by design, Linda said with a sad smile. Financial products are often deliberately complicated, and reverse mortgages are particularly complex. She pulled out a simple diagram and began explaining. A reverse mortgage, she said, allows homeowners over 62 to tap into their home equity without making monthly payments. The loan doesn't come due until the borrower dies, sells the home, or no longer lives there as their primary residence. The ads make them sound wonderful, Linda continued. Cash for retirement with no monthly payments. But what they don't emphasize is that interest and fees keep accumulating. By the time the loan comes due, there's often little or no equity left. But why wouldn't he tell me? Marla asked, the question that haunted her day and night. We never kept secrets. Linda had seen this too many times to count. Pride, shame. Maybe he thought he could fix things before you ever found out. Men of his generation often tie their identity to being providers. Admitting financial problems can feel like admitting failure as a husband. That night, alone in the house that would soon no longer be hers, Marla found herself talking to Robert's empty chair. You should have told me, she said. tears streaming down her face. Whatever was wrong, we could have faced it together. That's what marriage means. The betrayal cut deeper than any financial loss. After decades together, raising children, weathering life's storms side by side, he hadn't trusted her with the truth. The man she had built her life around had chosen deception over honesty. As the weeks passed, grief and anger took turns consuming her. Some days she raged at Robert for his betrayal. Other days she blamed herself for not asking more questions, for not insisting on involvement in their finances, for trusting so completely. "I was raised to believe a wife supports her husband's decisions," she told Linda during another meeting. "My mother never questioned my father about money. It wasn't her place." Different generation, different expectations, Linda acknowledged. But this is why financial literacy is so important, especially for women. Statistically, women live longer than men. Most will manage finances alone at some point. The reality of Marla's financial situation was stark. Robert's pension had died with him, leaving her with only her own modest social security benefits and a small 401k from her years at the school. Not enough to buy another home, barely enough for a modest apartment. She'd spent her life being frugal, careful with every dollar. Now, at 68, she faced starting over with almost nothing. The eviction notice came on a Tuesday, giving her 30 days to vacate. Michael and Emily helped her sort through decades of belongings, deciding what would fit in a one-bedroom apartment, what to sell, what to give away. Each item held memories. The dining table where they'd shared thousands of family meals, the rocking chair where she'd nursed both children, the grandfather clock that had been a 20th anniversary gift. "We can store some things at our place," Emily offered, watching her mother run her hand over the antique sewing machine that had belonged to her grandmother. "No," Marla said finally. "It's time to let go." The estate sale was both lucrative and painful. Neighbors who'd known them for decades came to offer condolences and left with pieces of their life. The young couple who bought the dining set reminded Marla of herself and Robert when they were first starting out. "This is beautiful craftsmanship," the young woman said. "We'll treasure it." Marla nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. In the economics of starting over, there's no way to calculate the true cost of selling memories priced by strangers who see only furniture, not the lives lived around it. By the end of the day, much of what had filled their four-bedroom home was gone, dispersed among strangers who knew nothing of the memories attached to each item. The proceeds would help Marla secure an apartment and cover moving expenses, but the emotional cost was immeasurable. That night, surrounded by boxes and empty spaces where furniture had stood for decades, Marla hit her lowest point. Curled on the bare mattress, sobs racked her body as she mourned not just the loss of Robert, but the loss of the life they'd built together, the security she thought they had, and the trust she had placed in him. Grief is rarely a single emotion. For Marla, it was a tapestry woven with threads of betrayal, abandonment, and the particular ache of realizing that the person who knew you best had kept their true self hidden. "I don't know how to do this," she whispered into the darkness. "I don't know how to start over at my age." But morning came, as it always does. Sunlight streamed through windows no longer covered by curtains. Marla made coffee in the kitchen that had been the heart of their home for so many years, and she made a decision. She would not be defined by Robert's deception or by her own naivety. This chapter of her life was ending, but she refused to let it be the end of her story. The small apartment Marla found was in a senior living community 20 minutes from her former home. One bedroom, a tiny kitchen, walls painted an institutional beige. Nothing like the home she had loved, but it was hers. Or at least the rent was something she could manage on her reduced income. For some, home is a place. For others, after devastation, home becomes a decision. a choice to plant new roots in unfamiliar soil, to begin again with nothing but the courage to try. "It's a new beginning, Mom," Michael said, as he and Emily helped her settle in. "A fresh start." Marla nodded, arranging the few precious photos she'd kept on a small side table. Her wedding day, the children's graduations, grandchildren's births. Robert smiled out from each frame, the man she'd loved, not the man who had betrayed her. She was still learning to reconcile the two. Linda had connected her with a financial literacy program for seniors at the community center. Twice a week, Marla joined a dozen other women, most widowed, some divorced, to learn the basics of money management, investing, credit, and consumer protection. "I should have learned this 50 years ago," she confessed to the group during their third session. "Better late than never," replied Doris, an 80-year-old widow who had discovered after her husband's death that they were deeply in debt. "My Harold wasn't dishonest, just disorganized. But the result was the same. I had no idea what our real situation was until it was too late." The stories Marla heard from the other women shocked and comforted her in equal measure. She wasn't alone in her financial ignorance or in having trusted completely, but she was determined that the next chapter of her life would be different. 6 months after moving into the apartment, Marla invited her children and grandchildren for dinner. The space was tight, folding chairs crowded around a small table, but she had decorated with plants and colorful throws, making the impersonal space feel more like home. "I have something to show you," she announced after dessert. From a drawer, she pulled out a binder labeled Marla's Financial Plan. Inside were neatly organized sections: budget, bank accounts, investments, modest but growing, insurance, and estate planning. A complete picture of her financial situation, clear enough that anyone could understand it. "I never want any of you to go through what I did," she explained. "No secrets, no surprises. If anything happens to me, everything you need to know is right here." Emily wiped away tears. "I'm so proud of you, Mom." Michael nodded. "Dad would be proud too." Marla considered this. Maybe. Or maybe he'd be uncomfortable with how much I've changed. Either way, I'm doing this for me, not for him. Later, after everyone had left, Marla sat in her small living room. The apartment would never have the character or memories of her former home, but it was a place of honesty and clarity, a foundation for this new, unexpected phase of her life. On her bookshelf sat a framed quote Linda had given her. "It's never too late to become what you might have been." George Eliot's words had become Marla's mantra. The grief still came in waves, the anger too. But increasingly, there were moments of pride in her newfound knowledge and independence. Moments of connection with others who understood her experience. Even moments of forgiveness for Robert and for herself. She still talked to him sometimes, especially on difficult days. "I wish we could have faced the truth together," she would say. "But I'm facing it now, and I'm still standing." The letter arrived on a Tuesday, exactly 1 year after Marla had moved into the apartment. The return address showed her former home street, but with unfamiliar names. She opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a note from the young family who had purchased the house after the bank's foreclosure sale. "Dear Mrs. Jennings," it read, "while renovating the attic, we found this box tucked away under the eaves. It has your name on it, so we thought you might want to have it." The small wooden box had indeed been labeled Marla in Robert's handwriting. Inside was a letter, dated just weeks before his death, and a small velvet pouch. "My dearest Marla," the letter began. "If you're reading this, 2 things have happened. I'm gone, and you've discovered what I've done. I can't ask for your forgiveness. What I did was unforgivable. The financial mess I've created started with one bad investment, then another desperate attempt to recoup those losses. Then the gambling that I convinced myself would solve everything. He explained how shame had kept him silent, how each day he had intended to tell her the truth, but couldn't bear to see the disappointment in her eyes. The house will be lost. I know that now. No last-minute miracle is coming. The only thing I can offer you is this. The velvet pouch contained her mother's wedding ring and a small diamond pendant. Family heirlooms she had assumed were lost in their last move. I didn't sell these, though I was tempted many times. Some small part of me couldn't take everything from you. I hope they bring you some comfort, or at least some financial help in what will be difficult days ahead. The letter ended simply. I loved you more than my pride should have allowed. I'm sorry I wasn't brave enough to show it. Robert. Marla sat for a long time, the letter in one hand, the jewelry in the other. The anger and betrayal still burned, but something else flickered alongside it. Understanding. Not acceptance of what he'd done, but recognition of the human frailty behind it. That evening, she added the letter to her financial binder, in a new section labeled History. The past couldn't be changed, but it could inform the future. Her future. Linda Friedman stepped up to the podium at the community center, smiling at the crowd gathered for the launch of the center's expanded financial literacy program. I'd like to introduce our newest volunteer instructor, she said. Someone who knows firsthand why this knowledge is so crucial, especially for women. Please welcome Marla Jennings. Applause filled the room as Marla took her place at the front. At 70, her hair was fully silver now, styled in a confident bob that framed a face lined with experience, but bright with purpose. Thank you, she began. My journey to financial literacy began with loss. Loss of my husband, my home, and the future I thought was secure. But it led me to knowledge, community, and a new sense of purpose. She scanned the faces looking back at her. Women and men of various ages, some nodding in recognition of shared experiences. I'm not a financial expert, she continued. I'm not here to give investment advice or tax strategies. I'm here to share what I've learned about the importance of financial transparency in relationships, about asking questions even when they're uncomfortable, about taking responsibility for your financial knowledge regardless of who manages the day-to-day bills. For the next hour, Marla shared her story without self-pity or blame. She explained reverse mortgages, their legitimate uses, and potential pitfalls. She described the warning signs she had missed and the questions she wished she had asked. Love is built on trust, she concluded, but financial survival is built on transparency. No matter how much you love someone, no matter how much they love you, financial secrets can destroy everything you've built together. After the presentation, a woman about Marla's age approached her, eyes damp with tears. You just described my life, she said quietly. Except I haven't lost my home yet. My husband died 3 months ago, and I've been finding surprises, bad ones. Marla reached out and squeezed her hand. Come to the workshop tomorrow, she said softly, remembering how alone she had felt at the beginning of her own journey. Bring whatever paperwork you have. We'll figure it out together. The woman nodded, relief washing over her face. The relief of finding someone who understood, someone who had walked the same painful path and survived. I was so ashamed, the woman confessed. I thought I was the only one. That's what isolation does, Marla replied. It makes us think our struggles are unique, but they rarely are, and shared burdens are easier to carry. Later that night, in her apartment that now felt truly like home, Marla added another note to her journal. For 2 years, she'd been documenting this journey, not just for herself, but for her children, and eventually her grandchildren. Financial literacy isn't just about understanding money, she wrote. It's about understanding power, partnership, and possibilities. It's about having choices, even when life takes unexpected turns. She closed the journal and glanced at the photo of her and Robert that still held a place of honor on her bookshelf. The complex emotions his memory evoked had settled into something like peace, not because what he did was right, but because she had found her strength in its aftermath. Tomorrow, she would help another woman begin the same journey. That was a legacy worth building. Marla's story is heartbreaking, but sadly, it's not rare. Every year, thousands of surviving spouses discover hidden financial decisions that devastate their retirement security when it's too late to change course. The world of retirement finances can be complex and confusing, but one thing is clear: secrecy has no place in healthy financial planning. Reverse mortgages, like the one that upended Marla's life, are legitimate financial tools when used appropriately and with full transparency between spouses. These loans allow homeowners 62 and older to convert home equity into cash while remaining in their homes. No monthly payments are required as long as the borrower lives in the home and keeps up with property taxes, insurance, and maintenance. However, what happened to Marla highlights several critical warnings. First, both spouses should be named on a reverse mortgage whenever possible. When only one spouse is named, the surviving non-borrowing spouse may face foreclosure after the borrower's death, unless specific protections were put in place at origination. Second, reverse mortgages should never be obtained in secret. They represent a major financial decision that affects both spouses and potentially their heirs. Third, financial transparency is not optional in marriage, it's essential. Regular financial check-ins, open access to accounts, and shared understanding of major assets and debts can prevent devastating surprises. If you're considering a reverse mortgage, consult with an independent financial advisor, not just the lender, and ensure all affected family members understand the implications. Remember that these loans accumulate interest and eventually must be repaid, typically through the sale of the home. Financial secrets between spouses rarely have happy endings. True security comes not just from careful planning, but from honest communication about that planning. Have you or someone you love ever faced financial surprises after losing a spouse? Share your experience in the comments. Your story could help someone else avoid devastating mistakes. And if you believe these hard lessons deserve a voice, like this video and subscribe to GoldPrint. Real stories, real warnings, real hope.